tenet of Islam can be broken, can be violated lawfully. It is quite legal to do so. So, again, to state, a lie is permitted. Because if telling the truth would lead to another thing that is prohibited, then, and that might be worse than lying, then it is permissible to lie. And this is from the 40 Principles of the Religion, an adapted summary of the Ihya Ulum al-Din. Now, let's have a brief look at some of the Islamic doctrines of deceit. Now, everyone is familiar with the term taqiyya, okay? Taqiyya is where they would want to focus your attention because they can justify it. You will often hear the story that says, well, you know, what if someone was threatening to kill you? Wouldn't you then tell a lie to defend yourself? Or what if someone was going to hurt your friends or your family? Wouldn't you tell a lie to protect them? And this is certainly one example that is actually routinely used by the imams to teach Muslims, well, look, here's an application of taqiyya. But like I said, there's more than one kind of deception in Islam. There's numerous kinds. Okay, there are several different kinds of deception. That's only one, and that's one circumstance. That's one isolated case, a very rare case for that matter. Of course, the Shia developed taqiyya because they were being killed by the Sunnis. Once they discovered that they were Shia, the Sunnis might well have killed them or harmed them, so therefore they had to learn to hide their identity. The same form of lying is called mudarat in Sunni Islam. So while they might say, well, taqiyya Shia, well, yes, it's called mudarat in Sunni Islam. Sunni, don't forget, comes from the Sunnah, Muslims of the Sunnah. Now, when you quote the Sunnah, as we did on the last show that I did, Muslims were denying the Sunnah. It's interesting that Sunni Muslims deny the Sunnah when Sunni comes from Muslims of the Sunnah, right, which is the Hadith and the Sirah, the biographies of Muhammad, actually the Gospels of Muhammad. So notice that one of its definitions is calculated deceit for the purposes of spreading Islam. We're going to dig into this much deeper later. Kitman, deceit by silence or omission. And interestingly, within Judaic law, if you read the Talmud, there's the statement that a half-truth is a whole lie. Right? Oddly enough, the rabbis state that a half-truth is a whole lie, whereas Islam has an entire methodology for telling half-truths. So, lying by omission, an example would be when Muslim apologists quote only a fragment of the verse 532, that if anyone kills, it shall be as if he had killed all mankind, while neglecting to mention that the rest of the verse and the next mandate murder in undefined cases of corruption, technically meaning temptation away from Islam, and mischief, again, temptation away from Islam. Also, one should note that with 532, the next verse is about what we would call cruel and unusual punishment, which includes chopping off the hands and the feet from opposite sides, crucifixion, and so on. Now, also, the verse 532 states in the beginning very explicitly, it was ordained for the Jews. It was ordained for the people of Israel. So this is a law that Allah stated was specifically applied to the people of Israel. It comes from the Talmud Sanhedrin. Now, the next verse, 533, refers to the Muslims, and it says there that they need to, as I said, cruel and unusually punish people for violations, which includes trying to lead them away from Islam. Now, of course, Islam has an entire doctrine dedicated to taking people away from their religions, which is called dawah. Note also that the Quran says that 532 was stated by Allah. Quran 532 is taken, as I've shown in the past, in detail on this channel, on the show, from the Talmud. It's the words of rabbis. It is not the word of God directly. So the Quran unfortunately thinks that the words of the rabbis and the Talmud is the word of God, is the eternal word of God's own spoken words. So yeah, so much for the Quran. So tawriya, deceit by ambiguity, lying by omission, taysir, deceit through facilitation, not having to observe all the tenets of the Sharia. Now, back to this idea of tawriya, deceit by ambiguity. Someone comes to visit your mom and you're 10 years old and your mom doesn't want to see that person and she's hiding in the back. She's in the garden, in the kitchen, in the attic, whatever. She's hiding in the basement, whatever the case might be. And this person says, is your mom here? And you say, no, she's not. Because you are interpreting that as, is your mom right here in front of us right now? And the answer to that is, no, she's in the bedroom. She's a few meters away, hiding under the sofa, whatever. But you are now lying using this tawriya, this deceit by ambiguity. Right? So this is how they teach this. You have tasir and darura, deceit. So deceit through facilitation, and darura, necessity, right? These are often termed ease and necessity. In other words, you can violate any of the tenets of Islam if there's a perceived need, and I would call it a subjective perceived need. Then they speak of, so you can engage in something that is haram or forbidden. Then there's muruna, blending in, the temporary suspension of sharia, so that, for instance, migrants be moderate. And then, of course, the granddaddy of deception in Islam, the granddaddy of deceit within Islam, is called hiyal. This is something you've never heard of. Okay, it means it's legal trickery, right? Contortion, contrivance, device, subterfuge, legalistic trickery in Islamic jurisprudence. It allows the breaking of oaths, promises, contracts, and any and all Sharia law. So I'll continue. Let's talk about hiyal. Now I'm going to go into more detail on all these later, but let's talk about hiyal because this is the most important one. I'm going to utilize the Brill Encyclopedia of Islam, and when we look up hiyal, it falls under tactics, military tactics. And of course, here's the word harb next to tactics, and harb means war. So it's a tactic of war. So it's a method of warfare, propaganda, and deceit, subversion to defeat an enemy used during wartime. Well, since it's a standard practice, we can then infer, as we have shown in past shows, Islam is permanently at war with the rest of the world. Now, in military science, the plural form of adab is a synonym of hiyal, stratagems in war. So hiyal, legalistic trickery, is also a stratagem in war, a method of defeating an enemy in war. Adab is also important. Now, adab al-jadal, in theology and law, a method of debating in which were discussed questions that were controversial. It was not a matter of finding the truth, but of convincing the opponent. Now, very interesting. So Muslims always say, well, let's have debate. Oh, let's debate. Because they have a very specific methodology of utilizing debate, which utilizes rhetoric in a deceitful, sophist manner. So it is rhetoric applied in a manner that uses sophistry to win. The whole purpose is to win. We'll be discussing this. Let's look at the hiyal again within the Encyclopedia of Islam. They speak here of artifices, devices, expedients, stratagems, the means of evading a thing. Many of you may well have had discussions or potentially even debates with Muslims, and they will never answer the question. They'll evade, they'll deflect, they'll move to something else. Because hiyal is the skill of evading something